In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was the youngest man elected to office, having been sworn in on January 20th, 1961. He served at the height of the Cold War, and the majority of his foreign policy concerned relations with the Soviet Union and Cuba. He also presided over the establishment of the Peace Corps, Alliance for Progress with Latin America, and the continuation of the Apollo program with the goal of landing a man on the moon. He also supported the civil rights movement, but was only somewhat successful in passing his New Frontier domestic policies. His tenure as president was cut short, owing to the fact that he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963, making Kennedy also the youngest American president to die at the age of 46.
Hello out there, my name is Christina. Welcome back to my channel. This is the place where we gush about the films that we love and try understanding the ones that we don't. We aren't here to talk about JFK, which is only kind of a shame because he is my favorite president, but we are here nonetheless. On today's agenda is the 2016 biographical drama film entitled Jackie. It was directed by Pablo Larraín, written by Noah Oppenheim, and stars Natalie Portman as Jacqueline Kennedy. It follows Miss Kennedy in her days as First Lady in the White House, in addition to her life immediately following the death of her husband. It would be appropriate to start this analysis with a bit of a confession on my part. Prior to watching Jackie, I hadn't thought too much about the role of First Lady and what this title implies responsibility-wise, in addition to how much of these are self-imposed versus related to compliance in some way. Suffice to say, as much as I admired JFK, I hadn't given Jacqueline much of a second thought, much less gone out of my way to educate myself about her achievements without being prompted to do so. In my defense, though, I know I'm not the only one. The impression Larraín had of Jacqueline for the larger part of his life was rather superficial and shallow, likely owing to the fact that Miss Kennedy had a reputation as a fashion icon, sometimes being dubbed the best-dressed woman in the world, even though she often declined making comments about her fashion-related choices when asked to do so. Suffice to say, Jackie claims to start right after the assassination of JFK. However, we have a lot of ground to cover in order to properly honor its title or character. starting now.
I've come to discuss tomorrow.
The Attorney General relayed to me your desire for a more modest ceremony.
I've changed my mind.
I'm sorry?
I said I've changed my mind. We will have a procession, and I will walk to the cathedral with the casket.
Well, even if we could resume the arrangements, I'm sure you can understand the Secret Service still has their concerns.
I'm President Johnson.
President Johnson would like nothing more than to fulfill your wishes, but I have to take into account his safety. The country couldn't endure another blow should any...
As very briefly touched on here, Jackie took on a very active role in planning her husband's funeral, modeling after the one that was held for Abraham Lincoln on May the 4th, 1865. Unfortunately, what followed was an influx of speculative publications regarding Kennedy's death. I mean, seriously, even the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories that tie Abraham Lincoln and Kennedy to one another that gets peddled around even today is merciless. In addition to debates about his success while he was in office. Consequently, Jackie decided to retreat from public view with a newfound value for her family's privacy. Her only exception to this was in making a trip to Washington so as to show respect for Clint Hill's attempts at shielding the Kennedys from further injury while acting as their Secret Service agent.
Fueled by and tethered to one another in a wave of astronomical tension and despair, Jackie leaves its audience with the impression that Robert Kennedy, John's younger brother, and Jacqueline are amicable outside of procedural concerns related to funeral planning following JFK's assassination. However, the supportive bond shared between them was predicated by a series of personal losses suffered by the Kennedys early on in their marriage. As referred to in Jackie, on August 9, 1963, the Kennedys had a son named Patrick pass away from complications of hyaline membrane disease after being born prematurely at 39 weeks old. Prior to this loss, in 1955, Jacqueline suffered a miscarriage during the third trimester of an expected pregnancy, and then she gave birth to a stillborn child named Arabella a year later. During both of these instances, Robert tended to Jacqueline in John's absence, going so far as to stay with her in the hospital, and between them grew a foundation for both support and counsel. It is worth mentioning, just while we are on the topic of what their relationship culminated into, that in 1968, Robert decided to run for president, and Jacqueline helped him campaign as best as she could in spite of how much she worried about his well-being, and advised him against doing so. On June 5, 1968, Robert Bobby Kennedy was shot during an event designated as a celebration of winning the California primary, and he died the following day.
Why are you really here?
Because I needed to talk.
You say that you pray every night to die, that your children have no use for you. You wish only to be with your husband. And yet, I'm not burying you today. There comes a time in man's search for meaning when one realizes that there are no answers. And when you come to that horrible, unavoidable realization, you accept it or you kill yourself. Or you simply stop searching.
Additionally featured are scenes with a priest named Father Richard McSorley, who parlays with Jacqueline's spiritual instability and provides comfort using the best mode of care he has at his disposal. McSorley is the only fictional character that does not have a real-life counterpart that has been indefinitely identified. However, he is modeled after a number of letters written to clergymen in the earliest years of Jackie being a widow. These interactions briefly explore her struggle with faith, as did a number of letters penned over 14 years to a Father Joseph Leonard that detailed her bitterness with God and fading optimism in private. Suffice to say, Jackie's premise for Jacqueline's exhaustive fixation with divine and dutiful purpose can be traced back to at least two significant losses amongst others. One defined by inexperience, and the other an abrupt end to matured potential.
I have lived a blessed life. And yet, every night, when I climb into bed, turn off the lights, and stare into the dark, I wonder, is this all there is?
You wonder?
Every soul on this planet does.
You'll have to share something personal eventually. People won't stop asking until you do.
And if I don't, they'll interpret my silence however they want. Her brow furrows. Her lips are drawn. She holds back her tears, but she can't hide her anger.
Most writers want to be famous.
You want to be famous?
No, I am fine as I am, thank you.
You should prepare yourself. This article will bring you a great deal of attention.
Oh, in that case, any advice for me?
Yes. Don't marry the president.
Potentially as a source of tension, though unwarranted, Jackie does suggest a lack of history between Jacqueline and the journalist she is seen dictating notes to on occasion. This journalist goes unnamed here, however, in real life he was an employee of Life magazine named Theodore White, who was solicited for the purpose of writing an article that would serve as a eulogy for JFK. Probably obviously, what also goes unmentioned is the fact that White wrote and published a book entitled The Making of the President in 1960, which has been considered most influential and persuasive on the account of Kennedy's eventual popularity as a presidential candidate. We are going to move on to something so much more important though, and that is the contents of the interview that he did with Jacqueline soon after JFK's death. More specifically, its recurring theme and its role in John's upbringing.
It's more important than all the rest. You know, every night before bed, we had this old Victrola, and we listened to a couple records. His favorite was Camelot.
The musical?
Oh, I'm so ashamed of myself. Every quote out of Jack's mouth was either Greek or Roman. And that last song, that last side of Camelot is all that keeps running through my mind. Don't let it be forgot that for one brief, shining moment, there was a Camelot. Oh, Jack loved history. It's what made him what he was. Just imagine he's a little boy with scarlet fever in bed reading history. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It's what Camelot's about. Ordinary men banding together to fight for a better world. Don't misunderstand me. Jack wasn't naive. But he had ideas. Ideas he could rally others to believe in.
Will those ideals live on?
Sure they will. Of course, there will be great progress. And there'll be other great presidents. The Johnsons have been so generous to me. There won't be another Camelot. Not another Camelot.
White was initially advised against entertaining this Camelot theme, but it was sustained for the better. Mentioned approximately 5 times during this interview, it was introduced, as seen here, as a reflection on an activity considered routine for the Kennedys during a very demanding period of time. Looking deeper at source material related to Camelot, however, we can begin to gain insight into JFK's intended strategy as a leader. Camelot, though an imaginary place, is believed to be based on a real location that is between Cornwall and Wales, and it is also where King Arthur's mythical Round Table is located. This table's members were selected based on chivalry and not just competency alone, and when fully assembled, the appointed members were reminded to regard one another as brothers in spite of their differences. They were additionally encouraged to consider the responsibility they had to one another and the citizens to which they represented when coming to a consensus. Camelot debuted as a musical by Lerner and Loewe in 1960, but this interest in King Arthur was sown by seeds that John's mom, Rose, planted when he was still a child. Eager to read her children novels with characters that could be proper role models, King Arthur and his knights quickly became one of John's favorites.
It was this work of fiction that inspired John to prioritize service to others above his own interest, and this informed his negotiation efforts as he took on varying degrees of political leadership and jurisdiction. Given Jacqueline's aptitude for preservation in this unfortunate context, some people might wonder if this quality was exclusive to her husband. The short answer to that is no. But we aren't here for the short answers, which brings me to the content that is currently behind me. Not originally a part of Jackie's screenplay, at Lorraine's suggestion, scenes in which Jacqueline is leading a tour through the White House were incorporated and act as a reoccurring motif. Having happened on February the 11th, 1960, this was one of the first instances where Americans heard Jacqueline's voice, which has been described as distinctively breathy and light, as captured by Natalie Portman's dedicated performance. On your left, you'll see scenes from the movie Jackie. On your right, you'll see its real-life counterpart. Fun fact, Kennedy ended up winning an Emmy for this tour, which is an hour long and you can find it online. If you want the link, just ask for it. I'll hook you up.
This is the White House, as seen from its south lawn. For the next hour, Mrs. John F. Kennedy invites you to visit the President's house and see some of the restorations she's made in its interior. Mrs. John F. Kennedy, third youngest of the 29 wives to live in the White House. Mrs. Kennedy, every First Lady and every administration since President Madison's time has made changes, greater or smaller, in the White House. Before we look at any of the changes you've made, now, what's your basic plan?
Well, I really don't have one, because I think this house will always grow and should. It just seemed to me such a shame when we came here to find hardly anything of the past in the house. Hardly anything before 1902.
Well, I really don't have one, because I think this house will always grow and should. It just seemed to me such a shame when we came here to find hardly anything of the past in the house. Hardly anything before 1902.
Suppose that you and your committee were to acquire some of the things that are in this room. What happens when the next president's wife comes into the White House?
Well, if they don't want it, in the past, you see, they could sell it or throw it out.
They don't want it. In the past, you see, they could sell it, throw it out, do anything with it they wanted. But then a law was passed last spring, which we asked to have passed, whereby everything that's given to or bought by the White House becomes part of its permanent collection. If a future First Family doesn't want it, it goes to the Smithsonian.
I could have actually included more scene comparisons, but I think you get the point. As alluded to by Jacqueline's comments, Jackie had visited the White House as a guest shortly before the inauguration of her husband, and she was disappointed to find it furnished with items that had little historical significance. In an effort to remedy this, Kennedy pursued potential donors of original historical pieces that are still there today, and established various associations and positions that would have White House restoration efforts as their main priority. A permanent curator for the White House, and the White House Endowment Trust, just to name a few. Going further, the White House Guidebook was published in 1962 as a collaboration between the White House Historical Association, the National Geographic Society, and Jacqueline, so as to raise the funds needed to restore the latter's temporary place of residency. Miss Kennedy knew her passion for history was not broadly applicable, and she gambled on the possibility of these tangible interactions with the White House, igniting an interest in learning about America and its founding citizens. This mission, eclipsed only slightly by Kennedy's passion for the performing arts, developed the standards that are referred to even now in structures and the like, determined to have some historical significance, or at risk of being destroyed, forgotten, and never referred to again. Often drawing inspiration from other countries and their leaders in her conduct as First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy proved diplomatic and popular in the guise of an international audience. She is remembered for her fluency and eagerness to immerse herself in an understanding of how things came to be, and admired for moving forward with an unwavering grace when burdened additionally by the trauma of witnessing JFK's murder. The better part of the last 2 decades of her life were spent doing book editorial work for Viking Press and then Doubleday, and this is maybe to be expected when thought of in unison with her first husband's potential. The Kennedys, with all of their idealistic charm, are not commemorated for proposing that America is the epitome of perfection, but in their dignified acknowledgement that there are always improvements to be made with respect to both ancestry and whatever is yet to come.
If you are still here, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, questions, comments, and concerns are encouraged and welcome below, in addition to suggestions as to what movies I should be watching and covering next. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.